Good afternoon, everyone. And like Gail said, welcome to the last webinar of the series. This one is focused on teaching comprehension across levels. If this is the first time you've attended the series, my name is Marn Frank. I work for Atlas as a consultant since retiring about a year ago. And I also am doing some tutoring with elementary students. I'm delighted once again to have both a friend and a colleague join me in this presentation. Penny, would you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on a Friday afternoon. My name is Penny Brown. I am an adult education teacher with the Southwest Metro District, and I am located in Shakopee.
Again, if you're new to the series, I want to share the participant folder. This feature has been growing across all 6 webinars. What I do the week before the webinar is I upload documents relevant to the topic. So what I've uploaded for this webinar is comprehension instruction for STAR EBRI teachers and volunteers. It's a 2-page document that summarizes the best practices in pretty straightforward language. Comprehension challenges and possible solutions, a document generated over about 10 years during STAR trainings that addresses almost every challenge that participants have experienced. And then text-dependent question stems for levels A to B, and then suggested question stems and frames for anchors 1 to 7. There are 32 total PDFs in this folder, and I welcome you to share it with other staff members if they are interested in accessing a really strong collection of documents related to EBRI. For today, we're going to focus on 4 things. Penny will talk about the evidence behind teaching comprehension skills across levels. The resource or the sources of the resources should be familiar because I've been pulling excerpts from them throughout the series. She'll also talk about the value of teaching the reader, not just the reading. Together, we'll review 3 comprehension strategy routines that demonstrate how to teach the reader. The first one will be on read closely, the second on read for main ideas, and the third on using text structures. And then once again, we'll take a look at the chart that was developed last year during the EBRI webinars that has a really solid list of comprehension resources that have been popular in Minnesota ABE. So that's our plan. If you are comfortable, please put in the chat box the answer to what do you want or need to learn about comprehension instruction. Is it the Friday afternoon blues? I'm not seeing much coming through. Okay, new resources and best strategies in classroom. Well, I think we'll do our best to cover that one. Knowing how others are teaching readers in multiple level rooms, assessing comprehension, how to choose materials, readings at the right level, tools to assess comprehension, especially in an online environment. I don't plan to cover assessment for comprehension, but within the participant folder and on the Atlas website, there are documents that give a step-by-step routine for assessing comprehension using Bader passages. Now, those Bader passages are copyrighted, so we can't post them on the website, but you can request them from Christine Kelly because we have permission from Pearson to share selected passages for STAR and EBRI teachers. And if you have any questions regarding that, I'd be happy to have an individual Zoom about assessing comprehension. Basically, what you're doing is you're using leveled passages. The students read them silently, and then you ask questions. And what you determine is a mastery level, and then you bump up for the instructional level. And they are in print and in slides, so you can assess comprehension in person or online. Carrie mentions engaging ways to teach comprehension. And I think we'll address that one with Teach the Reader. Anything else? Okay, Penny?
Okay, I'm going to share with you just a few of the findings from the field of adult literacy. The material that you're going to get today is based on, it's evidence-based, meaning the multiple pieces of research kind of point to these things as the most effective practices. This one is coming from Improving Adult Literacy Instruction, Options for Practice and Research, that was written in 2002. A few of the findings from that book are different texts and challenges to comprehension require the use of different strategies. Explicit strategy instruction must provide sufficient supports. Strategy instruction seems most effective when it incorporates ample opportunities for practice. The greatest benefits occur when students learn to flexibly use and coordinate the multiple comprehension strategies. So if you're looking for keywords, you will notice the word strategy is listed in each of those main points, and that is not a happy accident. That is the focus of what we will be looking at here in a few minutes. Okay, next slide.
I just want to clarify that this big textbook, which I've shown in past webinars, is from 2012, which makes it only 10 years old. And it was really a breakthrough collection of best practices based on research.
All right, coming from the CCRS or the ELA standards from 2013, to become college and career ready, students need to grapple with works of exceptional craft and thought, whose range extends across genres, cultures, and centuries. By engaging with increasingly complex readings, students gain the ability to evaluate intricate arguments and the capacity to surmount the challenges of complex text. Okay. Anything else? Okay.
Were you done with that slide?
Yep, I was just checking. Okay, go ahead, Marn.
I'm going to go back to it. My reaction to this is a very complex statement or excerpt. I mean, I think reading it twice would help, maybe 3 times to really get the gist. For all four components, we've talked about the evidence-based comprehension, or based on that component, best practice or ideal instruction. We've talked about scaffolded, routine, and explicit for each component. For comprehension, the scaffolding is actually done through the ELA reading standards levels A to E. Both the anchors and the sub-skills completely scaffold all of the comprehension strategies. So that work is done. And the goal, of course, is to gradually, over time, develop proficient and confident readers of various text lengths, styles, and structures. There are two routines that can be implemented. You can check comprehension informally during and after fluency readings. And we talked about this at webinar 5, where you stop and you ask a few 6WH questions. This not only checks understanding, but it sometimes draws students back to the text if they've drifted away. A more formal way for comprehension instruction is when you offer weekly or every other week lessons, probably longer than usual, with smaller large groups that focus on a particular strategy, its graphic organizer, and its outcome that can be used with other texts. For explicit, once again, you begin with modeling and guiding, and it's recommended that you start with less challenging texts below the instructional levels of the student or the group, so that they can focus on learning the strategy and not having to grapple with the text. And then when they have a good handle on the strategy, you help them apply it to more challenging texts that are at their instructional levels or more complex, which would be beyond their instructional levels. And this will guide them into being those proficient and confident readers.
Okay, now we're going to have an activity that requires some interaction from each of you. On the screen, you see a paragraph that is coming from e-reading worksheets, kind of a sort of a history/science content combined. And you see 4 possible comprehension questions that might be asked on the right side. We're going to give you a couple of minutes to read through this. And what I want you to think about as you're reading is what things have either you or other teachers that you may have seen or know of do to teach comprehension. So if this was a passage that you were going to use for a comprehension lesson, what are things that teachers might do, okay, to teach this as a comprehension lesson? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes now to read through that and think through it, and then we are going to ask you to record those answers on a Jamboard in a couple minutes. Okay, we are going to drop a link to a Jamboard in our chat box, and we're going to ask you to go to that. I am going to share my screen now so you can get a, yes. The link is going to take you to a Jamboard that looks like this. Our question is, describe what teachers might do when teaching a comprehension lesson using that Copernicus passage. Share your ideas on a virtual sticky note. So if you have not used a Jamboard before, over here on the left side, you have a toolbar, and the sticky note button is the fourth icon from the top. If you click on that, and then please record on your sticky note what different techniques, different things that teachers would do to teach comprehension. I'll give you some time to do that now. Again, the best technique for what we're going to be doing is using the sticky note button. That will be the fourth button from the top. In fact, it's, yeah, fourth from the top.
So I'm having trouble. This is Kristen. I'm pressing the sticky and nothing's happening.
It's not. Okay, I can certainly type it for you. Do you want to summarize for me? What would you like me to put down?
That to make a timeline of the dates.
Okay.
A lot of dates in there.
So this is Grayla. I'm having the same issue. I can't.
Sure.
Get
Grayla,
this.
tell me what would you like me to type for you?
Okay, so I think I would just begin. I mean, it's obvious the students would read the passage, but I'd have them reread it and then underline the things that stood out to them. Now, my other question is, would they be looking also at these questions? Because what I might have them do is read the questions first and then read the passage. But I don't know if they have these questions yet.
Right. It can depend, right? People
Okay.
do it different, but I think I captured, I was able to summarize what you were saying here.
Okay.
Okay, we have a lot of things, and I'm not going to sort through each one of these, but there is a point. Oh, we have a few more coming in. There is kind of a point to this activity that we're working. Oh, they're all coming in now. Okay, give me just a minute. I need a little more time. Okay. And I'm kind of purposely, I'm moving things around. So if you see yours moving around, I'm doing that. So don't panic. Okay. Yes, Christine,
I'm moving. Yeah, I was going to say, the one thing that bums me out is about Jamboard is, you know me, I like to write longer answers. And so part of it is cut off. What I was trying to say is that the topic, drawing them to how the topic is presented multiple ways, you know, and what got cut off was by drawing their attention to his view, his work, his theory, and how it's kind of restated. That was cut off. Sorry.
Right. Okay, so I'm trying to organize these a little bit. There's a point that we are trying to get at this, and it's distinguishing the difference between teaching the reading and teaching the reader. All right. Now, both are good. Okay. Teaching the reading is a lesson in which we're really based on them absorbing and understanding the content, okay, of what we're learning. Teaching the reader is more about giving them the tools so that in the future, like tomorrow, they would perhaps be able to take a different reading and understand it for themselves. So a good way that we kind of used to do this in the olden days is in STAR about 10 years ago, whenever, is think about all of the things on the board. And then if tomorrow we were going to read a passage about, oh, let's say what's happening in the Ukraine right now, or we were going to read a passage, you know, about having to do with the Constitution, perhaps, okay? Or the, I don't know, the water cycle. So kind of a different topic, still nonfiction. What things did we do today will help them when they're reading something different tomorrow, okay? And that's the difference between teaching the reading and teaching the reader. So a few of the things, like I put this one in, teach the word heliocentric. Okay, it's an excellent thing to do when you're focused on teaching the meaning of the content, but learning the meaning of that word is not really going to aid us tomorrow when we're reading about, say, the Ukraine. Okay, so that's definitely focused on teaching the reading. The same thing when we're teaching the historical background of the passage, asking students what they know. Okay, some of the vocabulary words can kind of work in more than one setting. But those are ideas of things that are very much focused on the text. And I know for myself, when I first went into teaching, I was trained as a secondary social studies teacher. That was my undergraduate degree. So I was very much content focused, okay? And when I made the transition into reading and literacy and adult, I think I was still very content focused, okay? What EBRI taught me is that my goal at the end of, like, when my students leave me, is to have given them some tools that they can take to unlock meaning for themselves, okay? If everything that I do in my practice is just focused on teaching the reading, they will always be dependent on me or another person to understand what something means, okay? When we shift towards teaching the reader, okay, the content is still important, but it isn't the primary focus. The focus is more in helping the student develop tools that they can transfer from one passage to the next, okay? I'm gonna go back to our main screen now. Any questions on this at the moment, on our Jamboard, before we go back to the main screen? Okay, I'm gonna do my stop share. And Marn, can we have you share your screen again? And then we can go to the next page.
Penny, you're saying that teaching the reading and teaching the reader, the balance should shift towards more about teaching the reader. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. We don't ever want to, you know, eliminate the content piece of it. Of course, that's why we're reading. Okay. And certainly we want to clarify confusion and be sure they're getting, you know, some understanding of what they're reading. But if all we ever do is
Mhm.
teach the reading, our students are always going to need us to understand what they read. They're always going to be dependent on us to learn background knowledge, to learn the specific vocabulary, to point out text structures, or things like that. When we shift our focus more towards teaching the reader, when we start to be strategic and teach strategies, which is really what we're headed to here, then we're giving students tools to one day hopefully become independent readers and not dependent on somebody else. Okay. And so when I first went through EBRI training, this was something that really stuck with me, is again, teach the reader, not just the reading, all right? And to summarize the point we're getting at is when we teach the reading, we are building background knowledge, but readers remain dependent on a teacher to unlock the meaning. So the next day, they still need that intense amount of instruction to understand something about the Ukraine, let's say. When we are teaching the reader transferable strategies, okay, over time, not overnight, but over time, we have a better chance of creating independent readers who are able to unlock the meaning on their own, and to take something that they can apply to texts that come from many different genres and different topics. All right. Okay. So now we're going to move into strategies. How do we do this? Okay, Marn, go for it.
This leads us into the first strategy, read closely for details. Where you're teaching students how to look for what does the text tell me? What's the evidence in the text that I should carry with me? So here's the routine. It's adaptable. But this is what we put together as a way of guiding you into this teach the reader. So you select a text that students can manage with support. Remember, the evidence said that strategies needs a lot of support. And you create a set of 6 WH questions. I use 6W in fluency, assuming that you understood that how ends in W. Penny said her students would have been confused by that. They would have wondered, well, what's the 6W word? So we came up with 6WH. Then you introduce each text, and if needed, you provide meanings for key vocabulary words or some background knowledge. But that's not what you do throughout the whole lesson. Here's the strategy for levels A to C. The teacher reads the text aloud, and it can be the whole text or paragraph by paragraph or section by section, whatever seems reasonable in terms of students understanding and being able to answer the question. And then at appropriate points, you stop and you ask those 6 WH questions and guide students in answering and finding evidence from the text. Not from their own background knowledge or experience, but what does the text say? At levels C to E, and there's some overlap here between the two ways or the two strategy routines. Again, you read the selected text aloud. Generally, the text will be longer, so it could be whole or section by section. Paragraph by paragraph just might take way too much time. You again model asking and answering those questions, and then you step up into having students write their own questions, which you may be surprised is quite challenging. And when they are ready, you take another step up into modeling and guiding, making inferences based on the text. Penny, Christine, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just a clarification, because I'm not sure. I think many people have heard the strategy. I know in social studies, we called it 5WH. Sometimes it's, I think Marn knows it as 6 Ws. It really, it's asking your question words: who, what, why, when, where, and how. And so whatever you call it really doesn't matter, but that's what we're referring to, is asking question word questions.
Right, and I've also seen it, I think Star calls it 5W plus 1H. So here is a sample of questions that I gleaned from those 2 documents in the participant folder. Obviously, most of them start with one of those W or H words. And collectively, those 2 documents, I think, cover from levels A to E, give you suggestions for questions across all levels. Most of them on the slide are literal, but you also want to get into those inferential questions too. Any questions on read closely? If you have them, put them in the chat, or you can turn your mic on. Okay. The second strategy is read for main ideas. And we've broken this one up into levels A to C and then D to E. It's recommended that for this one, you start with less challenging texts, again, so that students can focus on learning the strategy and not be grappling or having difficulty with the text. Introduce each, there's your background knowledge, and provide meanings for key vocabulary words as needed. Then to move into the strategy, similarly, you read the text aloud, paragraph by paragraph, or section by section, and you model asking and charting, who or what is this about? What are the topics or topic, singular, of this text? And then what are the details? What comes out as being a detail to remember, a piece of information to remember? This is harder than you might think with students. That was the experience with many STAR teachers, is they were surprised how difficult it was for students to accurately answer these questions. So it took multiple lessons for students to be comfortable doing this. When they are comfortable and more proficient, then you can support their application of the strategy, of the process, with more challenging texts in small or large groups. So if you have a multi-level class, again, you would teach it at the lowest level of the group. And then when they were ready, you would separate them into small groups of similarly leveled readers. They don't have to be the same, but similarly leveled. And they support each other with the asking and charting. And then if they are ready, if they've mastered that process, you can guide them in how to write summaries based on what they've listed as the topic or topics and details. And again, you will probably find that summary writing is also very challenging and will take multiple lessons. I took the text that Penny shared about Copernicus and I read it, and I filled in this graphic organizer. I found the text to be very detail heavy, as you probably did. So it took me a while to land on who or what is this about, who would be Copernicus, and what would be his theory about the universe. Then the details related to those topics are that he viewed the universe as sun-centered or heliocentric. His theory or view disagreed with the Catholic Church's view of being earth-centered. His new theory was not published until 1543, the year he died. This was probably a major issue with the Catholic Church, and they did not formally accept his view until 1822, which was almost 300 years later. Once I did those details, I really felt that I had the gist of the text. All of the dates were not important. What was more important is that I understood the gist of that text. And so this is what I would remember along with the process.
Marn, on this one, I noticed that you did everything in complete sentences. If you would use this with students, would you be taking the time for them to write complete sentences, or would phrases be more acceptable as more of note-taking?
I think phrases, maybe even words, would be acceptable.
Okay.
I had a very hard time not using complete sentences. So at first I had phrases, and I was just personally uncomfortable with that.
Okay.
But eventually you would guide students into sentences for a summary. So I guess I wanted to show not only how well this graphic organizer worked for identifying topics and details, but it really led neatly into writing a summary.
Okay.
Here's the routine for levels D to E. Again, it's recommended that you start with less challenging texts, introduce any background knowledge you feel is important, work with key vocabulary words. But then you're using more complex questions. So you would read the text either as a whole or section by section, and model asking and answering what are the central ideas or themes. So that's a step above the topics. And what are the details that convey the ideas or themes? So there's a little more thinking and differentiating at levels D to E. And then there's a greater focus on summary writing. So once they've answered those questions in words or phrases or sentences, then you guide them in how to write an accurate and objective summary of the text by changing the words and phrases around either by order, adding transition words, so that you have a high quality summary of the text. And then after many, many lessons, you would support their application with the more challenging texts at their instructional levels, because those texts already have challenge at instructional levels. Penny and Christine, did you want to add anything to that? Any questions before we take a break?
Say, Marn,
Yes.
this is Keith here. Would these strategies, would you focus on one or two at a time, or are they going to be kind of a blend in the lesson?
That's an excellent question. Over the whole series, Keith, you've asked some really good questions. You would focus on one at a time.
Okay,
The intent is not to teach all the strategies. So it's not about quantity, it's about quality.
Mhm.
And,
We-
oh, go
we-
ahead, Penny.
We tend to refer to it as lesson plans, but really I want you to think of it as a unit plan. Like that one strategy that we just did with the topic and kind of the details, that could be 6 weeks worth of work, okay, of comprehension lessons in your classroom. I think of it as tools. Is it better to have one tool in your toolbox that you can use very well for multiple purposes? Or do you want to have 5 tools in your toolbox that you really can't use at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, strategy instruction does take time for students
Mhm.
to internalize it. And we may feel like, oh, here we go again, we're going to do the same strategy. But that's not necessarily what students are feeling, because we are trying it with different texts. You know,
Mhm.
we can increase the difficulty of texts. And so sometimes I know we feel like, oh, we're going to do it again. Do they really want to do this again? But they actually need to do it again and again and again. Like Penny said, better to have one that they can apply on any piece of text than a bunch that they're not quite sure what to do with.
Explicitly stated by using repetitive words, and then that they're recognizing when there's pronouns that are connected to, that are referring to that topic. And then when the topic is more, it's more implied, okay? I think it starts there. And if they're not able to kind of consistently and solidly identify the topic, you're not going to get to the main idea. So I'd say begin there with the topic.
And I would totally agree with that based on what STAR teachers reported after trying these strategies, is they were surprised often that sometimes finding the topic, who or what the text was about, took weeks in itself with a lot of revisits in order to make it solid.
And part of that is what I was suggesting earlier with the Copernicus text, is something that our students often don't realize is that the topic can be presented many different ways throughout a text, and they lose track. You know, it can be, you know, with pronouns and, you know, and alternate words and things. And, you know, so I mean, even my students, you know, on the lower end, tracking that idea that his work, Copernicus, his work, his view, his theory are basically the same thing. So I think that's where that thinking aloud and practicing, helping them find kind of that the repeated topic, and understanding that the topic is there, but it may not always be in the same words.
After they have the topic down, then it seems that a lot of the like kind of commercially produced stuff that I've seen focuses on distinguishing the topic from the details, which is necessary, but I'm shifting to focus more on the relationship between the topic and the details, because that's something that what we talked about today we can get at. We can get at that relationship when we're listing the top, where here's the topic, here's the details, and then we can ask our students, so what's the connection? The text structures help us see, okay, well, these details are describing this, or these details are showing the effects of this. Okay, so it's kind of helping them see the connection between those two things. And then there's a third piece in there is, especially as you get into the more complex text, is recognizing irrelevant information. Like, okay, there's your more complex text will throw in a sentence that really isn't a detail associated with that topic, because authors do go on tangents, right? And so that's a more advanced skill, but also helping them recognize that, you know what, one of these things is not like the other one. And that can also help you kind of get towards what the main idea is.
Yeah, and I think learning to, like with Copernicus, all those dates were confusing to me. I didn't feel that that was necessary to understand the gist. But yeah, I'm I'm not a beginning reader, so therefore that is more automatic, which would not be the case with beginning or developing readers.
If you think about it, you can draw some parallels there between math and reading, because one of the skills our students have to learn with word problems is there's a lot of information, but they don't need all the information, right? And
Right,
that's
exactly.
something to develop. Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it's all, this is why my students have trouble highlighting, because they literally want to highlight every word except for maybe a couple thes and ands. And being able to recognize that, in that case, was the point of it the years, right? Or was the point of it something larger? So I think, for beginning readers, that's a skill to learn.
And one way that I've kind of worked on that in the past, if you've ever met me or heard me talk about my practices, you know that I like to do a lot of things called sorts, where people are, manipulating things on tabletops. If you take a paragraph and you cut it into its separate sentences, and then ask the students to figure out which one doesn't belong. Okay, there's something about making that a physical task that generates discussions among my students that does not happen if it's a paper pencil task. So it does require more work up on my end. But again, once I have it, I can store the envelope somewhere and use it again. But that's also, it's not necessarily going to get us to duplicate exactly how they state the main idea on a test, which is really, kind of a different skill in a way. But it does help, I think, build the foundation of thinking that is required to help them move towards the main idea. So I'm not entirely certain we answered your question, because there isn't, if there was an easy answer, I'd give it to you for that.
I think you did. I think you gave some concrete ideas about how to break it down, because it's not easy. We assume, because we're good at it, that it's easy, but that is not necessarily the case for many students. I also want to give a shout out to the Atlas website and what's available for the CCRS ELA reading standards resources. So if you go to that link, which Gail will put in the chat box, you'll find sample resource evaluations, lesson plans, and units, workouts, which are intended more for professional development, videos of teachers teaching the reading standards, and then ideas for remote instruction. So Christine, thank you for putting that together over the years. There is a lot there. In addition to the reading EBRI resources, there's a lot there too. Okay, as we have concluded the other webinars, we'd love to hear what you've learned. What information, routines, or resources will be most useful for you? What will you bring back to your classrooms? If you could take a moment to put those in the chat box.
And this is, I know sometimes this feels like a little bit of a gotcha, we want to see if you were paying attention question, but it also actually does help us. I mean, that feedback helps us figure out if there's some things that we need to emphasize more next time around, or some things that we should skip altogether. So there is another reason why we're asking that question.
Sort of a sneaky evaluation.
Yeah.
Okay, to go slow. Yes, to get good at one strategy at a time. Yeah. Okay, similar. Yeah, one text structure at a time. And the chunking concept. Yeah. If the whole text is going to be too much, just like if the whole word is too much, you chunk it. and the idea of strategies, not just content. And finding the balance between teaching the reading and teaching the reader.
All right, thank you, everybody. We appreciate that, a little bit of feedback.
We do. The end of webinar 6 and the end of the series. So no matter how many you attended, thank you so much for joining us. And if you have questions, you can email Christine, and if necessary, she can forward them to me. And don't expect a quick answer, but I would get back to you. Yeah, and the desire to learn more about assessment, once again, there are resources on the Atlas Star EBRI website under diagnostic assessment that could help you get started.
Yeah, go ahead and email me with those questions. There are also a growing number of resources that focus on evidence-based reading instruction, including some new courses on the Links website. And but we've got plenty with Atlas. And I just want to say a big thank you to Marn for coming out of retirement, although we haven't let you be there too long, and doing this EBRI study circle. We appreciate it. Your knowledge is really irreplaceable. And so we're glad to still have it with us.
Thank you. I'm finding semi-retirement to be a happier place for me. So this series was part of my shift towards semi-retirement.
Carrie, I just saw your comment. I'm thank you, first of all, for taking all 6 of those EBRI webinars. What we're trying to do is distill down what had been 7 full 8-hour face-to-face trainings into some webinars. So it does not surprise me that you need some more time to, to reflect on things. I expect that a lot has been thrown at you, but I'm hoping that you're finding it valuable.